All right, it's that time of year again. You know, the time of year when you realize that about like a month or two ago, you should have probably winterized all of your stuff, but you didn't. So I'm going to talk about winterizing all that relic equipment you got around. And you might be wondering why I'm standing outside the post office. Well, it's the most wonderful time of the year, isn't it? When you get to winterize all your equipment. And I had to pick up some stamps for Christmas cards. So without further ado, I guess we get in the video. I know a lot of you are wondering, what the heck are you doing wearing the Ford hat? Mike, what is this madness? I wish I had an excuse and say that there was a method to the madness, but there's no method, it's just madness. Anyways, let's get to the shop. Okay, I finally made it back to the shop. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is actually not your gas equipment, but your battery equipment. How do we winterize that stuff? And that's actually pretty simple. So these all pretty much run on lithium-ion batteries, so unlike the lead-acid batteries that need to be vented, you can store those inside your house. You can just pull them off. Remember, if you're cold, they're cold, bring them inside. Store them in your hall closet, find a cabinet, wherever you can find that your wife isn't going to yell at you for having them in there. That's where you can put them. Make sure to put them in a nice safe spot so you remember where they are in the spring, which you'll probably forget because you put them in a nice safe spot that you knew you wouldn't forget. That's pretty much it for the most part for the lithium batteries. Now you can go into the instructions, I think like with my Ego, and I store my Ego batteries this way. They tell you charge them up, put them on the charger, unplug the charger, and leave them on the charger while you're storing them over the winter. That's how I do it because that's the way the manufacturer recommends. I mean, these lithium-ion batteries, you carry them, you probably put it in your nightstand on a charger overnight right next to your head. You carry them in your pocket all day long. They're right here on these calculators that my math teacher said I'll never have sitting in my pocket all the time. That was a lie! Yeah, I have some issues with pent-up issues from grade school and math teachers. I told you my math not so good. Anyways, when I talk about math, I'm talking about equipment. So let's get into gas equipment. I'm going to talk a little bit too about how I actually like to take care of my two-cycle equipment. So the first thing I like to do, typically, like for something like this, like a blower or a weed whip that I'm going to use pretty frequently, I basically drain the gas tank, run it a few times, make sure that until it dies, and then run it again until it dies. And you know, the spurts will get smaller and smaller, and then I call it, I put it away. If you have equipment that you will be storing for a longer period of time than just winter, which you can do is actually drain all the gas, just as I said, and put some two-cycle oil, straight two-cycle oil in there. This does actually have stabilizers put into it. What you can do is you basically pour this in the gas tank just like this with the stop button on, so to speak, so it won't start. Pull the handle, get it into the carburetor, and then pour whatever is left in the gas tank out. Make sure it's in the primer button and all of that kind of thing. That's what you want to do if you're going to store it for even a longer period of time than maybe like over the winter. And one of the issues is with this is that when you start it, it's going to be tougher to start because there's going to be a lot of oil in it, and it's probably going to smoke a lot. So be prepared for that. Start it up outside for the first time. Usually what that'll do is that'll preserve all of the little plastic parts and all of the little rubber parts and stuff like that in the carburetor, so hopefully you don't have to replace the carburetor. The running dry method is something you could do with your 4-cycle equipment too. However, if you're going to do with your 4-cycle equipment, or even 2-cycle equipment too, this makes sense. If you have a fuel pump, don't do that. Don't try to run it dry. Don't try to drain the gas and run it dry and let it sit. I have a push mower that I do this with. It doesn't have any kind of a fuel pump, so it's not a big deal. But if you try to run it dry, when you're pushing air through that fuel pump, it ruins the fuel pump, and then you're replacing fuel pumps, and that can get a lot more expensive than even replacing carburetor. Otherwise, it's usually a pretty safeguard. Like the push mower that I do that too, I've done it since it was new, and I've never had an issue with the carburetor coming off of winter or any other time of the year. Some of you might be like, well, you're supposed to add something to the gas, and if you want to do that, hey, that's great. You can add something to the gas. But before I get to that, I do want to talk about some other method that a lot of you guys like to do, which is the cold start method. You know, a few times out of the year, you go into the shed or whatever, you start up the mower, let it run idle, come up to heat, shut it down. You do this maybe once a month or so. This is also effective, and the reason why is because when I say gas lasts 6 months, it really kind of starts deteriorating after that 6 months. So it's kind of like if you deal with the expiration of medication. Yeah, the medication may not be quite as effective, but it would still work. That's kind of how the gas is at 6 months. It's probably not as effective, but it will still work. So you're not necessarily dealing with, quote, bad gas. You got gas that's beginning to go bad, but you don't necessarily have bad gas after 6 months. And the larger concentrations that you have of it, the less likely it is to deteriorate and go bad like that. So if you have gas in the gas tank, it's actually the stuff in the carburetor, and all you do is you're starting it up, flushing that stuff out of the carburetor, getting fresh gas put back in from the larger volume of the gas tank, and then next month you repeat the process. And that's why that works. Now, I'm gonna go talk to you about some of these chemicals that you can add. This is probably one of the most famous ones, Sta-Bil. And I want to talk to you because these things kind of work differently depending on what kind you get. Sta-Bil, what it does is when you put it in here, if it says it treats up to 2 gas, your 2 gallons of gas, you actually want to set it up for how many gallons the container holds, not how much gas you actually have in there. So if you have a 2-gallon gas tank, for instance, and you only have, it's half full, so you'll have 1 gallon. You don't want to do a half an ounce, you want to do a full ounce, because it actually, what this stuff does is it coats the top of the gas. So it creates this little membrane on top of the gas so that the gas doesn't, you can't get the air and the water and everything to the gas. And that's how the Sta-Bil actually works. So this is good for mowers or something like that that's just sitting. If you're going to have gas cans that you're going to have to move around the shop or whatever, you might want to use something different than Sta-Bil, because when that gets activated, that Sta-Bil doesn't sit on the top anymore, and then the air and the moisture and stuff can get in there. So it's for just basically sitting still, stuff that isn't going to move. That's what will work with this. Now, you can't get, this is Lucas, which I Safeguard, which Lucas makes some good products in general. But this ethanol fuel conditioner, typically when you see that ethanol fuel conditioner, that stuff will mix in with the gas. That basically, the ethanol is really what the big crime is in a lot of our gas, because ethanol attracts moisture or water. It'll allow a lot of water to get into the gas as it sits longer. So putting in something that has a ethanol fuel conditioner in it, this also has stabilizers in it, and a lot of times this stuff will mix, if you see that ethanol conditioner, it will mix into the gas. It can stabilize, I guess you could say, the ethanol and make sure that the moisture doesn't come in it. This is particular, this is heat. But the reason why is that this also is a water remover. So if you look at it, this will prevent the gas from freezing if you get really cold. So if you guys are up in Minnesota or Canada, you might want to actually you could use this to throw in there. Should help prevent it from freezing, although it might still get cold enough that it still freezes with the heat in it. This stuff will help prevent your gas from freezing, plus it has a water remover. Even if the ethanol attracts water, this should help actually pull water out as well. I don't know exactly the whole science behind it. I'm not a scientist. I just do that landscaping science. Getting into landscaping science, you might be wondering, if I got a bottle like this and I got to figure out how much 1 ounce is so I can treat up to 5 gallons, which is what this does. I have a nifty little thing here that I use, and this is basically, it's a baby bottle. And the reason why I like the baby bottles, it has, I don't know if you can see this on the camera, but it has measurements on it. So I can measure out 1 ounce, or if I need 2 ounces or whatever, I can measure it out. This is a glass one, you can get a plastic one. The plastic ones will probably have to be replaced over time because this stuff will tear apart the baby bottle. Do not use these for your baby after you've done this, okay? I need to stress this. Do not, this is now no longer a baby bottle. This is now a stabilizer bottle. I am not going to be giving this to my baby. This is actually left over from my son from when he was a baby. But you can get glass. Glass tends to break, but they're fairly cheap. You can find them in the baby aisle at Walmart or whatever store, for that matter. Now you know all the methods on how to stabilize your fuel, how to prepare your fuel for winter. All of your mowers should start right. And this gets to probably the most important part. of this whole process. It isn't what you do in the late fall, early winter. It's what you do in the late winter, early spring. That's important. Before any of this equipment needs to get used, before you have to take it out to any customer's property, about a week or two before, and you're gonna have to take some guesswork probably on this, but at least a week or two before, you're gonna wanna go out, you're gonna wanna start it up. Make sure it starts, make sure it runs as it should. Because if there's a problem with it, you gotta replace a carb, you gotta clean a carb, whatever the case, you wanna have time to do that. You don't wanna be sitting there last minute, the day before, like, I gotta get this out, mowing lawns tomorrow, and it won't start because of bad gas. That's the biggest thing. Carburetors are usually fairly cheap. Cleaning them is even cheaper. That's probably where your problem's going to be, is in the carburetor. That's probably the most important thing, is just make sure to give yourself some time before you actually need to use the equipment to make sure the equipment starts and runs. And that being said, I want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas, and I'll see you next time.